So yeah, for people who came in a bit later, welcome. And today we also felt in a way that if we had to do this again, which we will be doing again in the future, is because it's very much a kind of dry run, is that we probably would have taken, or it would have been better to actually have two sessions on interaction, because we do acknowledge that it is a very complex concept, and that for some in the room, you might have just come to it for the very first time. So we are here in company with people who all have very different exposures, interests, and experiences with it. So we've decided to slow it down, and diffraction, that we take 2 weeks at least for diffraction. So we've got some ideas about this, and it's interesting. It almost seems to echo what happens in the reading group, where we started like normal speed and then we got slower and slower, didn't we, Viv? And also for people who are interested in our reading groups, please ask George directly, because they can help you to get in touch with our reading groups, where we basically more or less read only Barad's work, but slowly. So we are, as I was saying, focusing on this. This is a book that has been put together by the editors of this series at a time, with maybe one or two people who had special expertise, which were invited in. And Viv and I are sort of, coordinating, teaching some of these concepts in this glossary for the coming weeks. And then we will be joined by Celia and by Candace at some point as well. And maybe others will come on board when they just realize how exciting it is what we do and what we do together, but also when maybe they have a little bit more time themselves. Okay, so let me just see. What shall I just give an overview what we're going to do, Viv? Yeah. We're going to return to what the session on interaction generated on the whiteboard. Now, some of you might not be there, might not have been there last week. So we're going to, the sort of backstory was, and maybe if you can share the whiteboard, the screenshot of the whiteboard, or maybe you're already doing that. Yes, you're already doing that. Fabulous. And now I'm completely lost. And the backstory is that we watched the 3-minute video that is in your entry for interaction. And that's where you will find the link if you weren't here last week. Then in small breakout rooms, we discussed it, and people were using materials such as string and clay and fabric and all sorts of other things to express the ideas that were emerging. And then they took photos which were recorded on the Zoom whiteboard. So you can see here, and it might be an idea, especially for the people who weren't there for their benefit, but also for our own, returning, to say a little bit about this. What do you think? Anybody who was there and would like to? What was going on here? Your own kind of perceptions before we actually go, and I'll hand over to Viv to work on this in our breakout rooms. And before we're going to read together the diffraction entry. can be very descriptive at this point. It is just for people who weren't here last week, it might be, well, what the heck is going on here?
Erin,
Could be-
I can't find how to raise my hand.
Oh, I always have that problem. Charlotte,
Yeah.
yeah, go on, just go
So
in.
I'm raising
Yeah.
my physical hand, but I
Yeah.
I can't raise the virtual hand. I just wanted to share in this session last week that I was playing with, so the blue tangled thread thing in the middle, there you go, thanks George, is mine, or is the thing I was thinking with. And I shared with people that whilst it was so useful to think with when we were talking about the phenomena of Facebook and how, whilst one might not have Facebook or be on Facebook, we are in contact with the phenomena of Facebook. And I was thinking with this ongoing and the iterations coming off of it, that was where that thinking was taking me. And then we spoke about the apparatus being involved with the essence of interaction. But one of the things I said at the sort of the end of that session was, whilst it's beautiful to me and it makes sense to me and it unplugged the thinking I was thinking with, I was very aware that I had become quite attached to it, felt quite strongly about it because of how active it was in the thinking process. But I was also aware that to somebody else it could appear very ugly and slightly stupid and maybe silly. And particularly, I mentioned I expected my son to come in and go, "What on earth is that?" And true to form, my son did come in and go, "What's this for?" I thought it's quite interesting that it not what is it, but what's it for? Almost like, what are you gonna do with it next? And I have to confess, I've not been able to throw it away, which is fine, except I'm not sure where I'm going to continue to store things from this series. I think I'm almost going to have a museum of thinking with the thing. So it's currently sat on my running medals because it feels so precious. But my son just every now and again walks past it and goes, "But what's it for?" And he's so desperate to find out what's it for. And it has also changed, so it's now in the shape of a bow, and I just keep going back to it and just keep thinking about what we were doing. So
Thanks, Charlotte. Sylvia, you've got a comment in there. Love the idea of a museum of thinking with things. Very nice. Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of all sorts of other things. Anybody else? You don't have to put up your hand, you can, I think we did it last week as well. Just, come in when you would like to comment on, what was this doing? What was this for, this whiteboard? Except one that has please do touch in front of the things. Yeah, please do touch. Mm.
I think it's made it a kind of assemblage of all of our thinking, but it's also interesting how it's made it very flat and two-dimensional by putting it on that whiteboard, which is interesting, isn't it? Especially like Charlotte was saying, she feels so attached to her thing. And I think that's the capturing, isn't it? That's why I think writing in this way is very difficult, because we're capturing often what is very maybe exciting, very personal, or like there's so many different threads, and then we're trying to capture it in this writing form often, which can be tricky. So, and you guys do it very well, Viv and Karin. That's why we're here.
But it was interesting about the lines, the lines that are just going places outside its frame.
Yeah.
And sort of the importance of thinking about interaction as not something that it is that one does as a human, but it's about undergoing, as Ingold would say, it's something that is happening, that you're a part of, that you can't step out of. On the lines were doing interesting things there when one of us got going, then suddenly these lines were all over the place. And it's also this thing about which lines should you be drawing? What are the most important ones? What is the most important tracing? You know, in order to be comprehensive and to capture.
Yeah. And how it can look messy. Charlotte's son is interesting, his perspective, instead of him seeing it as something, oh, can I have this string, to do with like the way that his brain works, or the way he thinks. He's thinking, what, you know, about product kind of, isn't it? Or what can I don't know. So even that's quite interesting, the different perspectives that people are bringing to it. Interesting.
Is it Miller, Charlotte? You say, is it Miller that says there is no such thing as subject and object, there are only objects, including us? And to what extent are even our objects?
I think it's Miller.
Whether including us?
It's interesting the messiness of what it looks like on the screen as well. Like Angela was just saying, that it's very two-dimensional, but it also feels quite chaotic, and I really love that. I do wish, I very often, whether I should or shouldn't, maybe you'll all correct me later, is I very often put things in front of my son just to see how he responds, because he hasn't had the same level of conditioning, I guess, that I've had. So he's not having to unlearn as much as I'm having to unlearn. So I quite like to go, well, look, here's this, and just see what he says to it.
How old is he?
He's 9.
Yeah. Okay, Viv, do you think it might be an idea to
let's
hand over?
I mean, just to also think about this whiteboard, and you know, we're moving on to diffraction now. So is there anything to do with diffraction here? Could we think about diffraction in relation to this whiteboard? Anyone can jump in.
Every time I've been trying to speak, the dogs start to bark. So
Oh, shame.
it changes.
They can join. The dog can join.
Well, yeah. So now the dogs are barking at something outside. So anyway, I think that the diffraction is thinking things through other things. If we use it as that, when we were in our breakout rooms creating something, we were thinking it through ourselves and how we were seeing interaction. But now that we see what we've made through others and through what others made, we see it differently. Like what I wasn't even going to post mine, right? I wasn't even going to post my image, and then I posted it, and then people started putting lines through it and connecting through it, and I'm thinking, here's diffraction, here's how we see things through other things. And so perhaps mine makes more sense, or perhaps mine has a little bit more meaning, because when I was doing it by myself, you couldn't see anybody else's. You didn't know what anyone else was doing. And so I think this lends itself really well to diffraction.
Yeah, we were just discussing it this morning and thinking, you know, because it was a little bit rushed last week, we didn't have a large amount of time to really engage with each other's, you know, we did a little bit, but we could have gone into more depth. I mean, first of all, in the small groups, people sort of, I think the small groups that I was in, people were grappling with the video, you know, and there was a lot to do, the video plus Facebook, because one is also diffracting through this notion of Facebook as a phenomenon, or diffracting through the reading, the video. So there was a lot to do. And that's why we thought perhaps, you know, if we did it in future, we would slow it down a bit, because not only in the smaller groups, but now in the larger group, one would have some cross-pollination of ideas and thoughts and thinking through each other. Yeah, this one of yours, Charlotte, I was just thinking about the Mobius strip, the way that the ribbon turns back on itself. For me is, you know, it's sort of very much about interaction and diffraction. So yeah, I think I can see why you can think further with that. But
just for clarification purposes, is that for people who weren't there,
yes,
that we had
yes.
in the 3 minute, it was about Ebola. And then we thought, well, we could ask COVID, but no COVID, which is actually in the glossary as an example to engage with. But we thought maybe something like Facebook, especially because of Trump and et cetera, and his friends and what's happening. And then, but it could be another phenomenon, right? So when we think about interaction and we trace a phenomena, what would that yield? And that's what was happening on the whiteboard. So it was for the work from the small groups, and we thought it would be generative to go back to it in terms of diffraction. So is there diffraction here? Yeah.
Anything else? Yeah, George?
I'm preparing to put people into breakout rooms. Is that correct?
No, first we're going to, I think, look at the reading, and then we'll go into breakout rooms. So if you could just put the reading up, I think it's that. We're going to read aloud page 54, and we're going to stop at the exercise, and then we're going to discuss in breakout rooms. So
that's right.
If you wouldn't mind putting the reading up, George, thanks. Okay. So the way that we usually do it in the reading groups is that we just ask for a volunteer to read out loud, and you know, people can read as much as they would like to. Is there anyone who wouldn't mind reading this text for us?
And it might well be that we have to stop and maybe repeat, and if certain sentences go too fast. So that's perfectly fine. And we don't read further than exercise in the bottom of the page.
Okay.
I don't mind, but with nerves, I get a stutter, as you've just seen. And there's a couple of words here that I'm not sure I'm going to get the pronunciation right. So would you be able to help me?
Definitely.
Okay, diffraction. Donna Haraway initially proposed the notion of a diffractive methodology as an alternative to reflection and reflexivity. She considered reflection or reflexivity as an optics that produces sameness, preferring instead an optics of diffractive patterns, which enables differences that matter. Haraway drew on the work of Trinh Minh Ha, who troubled the colonizing logics of binary thinking about identity difference, self and non-self, other as apartheid. Minh Ha saw the need to disrupt or queer the binary logic of identity and configure difference differently. Haraway was instrumental in reading Minh Ha's account of difference through the figuration of diffraction. Diffraction patterns map the effects of difference rather than just where differences appear. Do you want to pause?
Maybe. What do you think, Viv?
Yeah. Would anyone like to take anything up before we move on? we will have a chance to talk in small groups, so people might feel more, you know, free to talk there. But if there is any clarification that people would like.
It's
before you
just that
move into-
sentence, there's the sentence of Haraway drew, and it is just the way it's done by the copy editors. But so Haraway drew on the work of Tin Min Ha, who troubled the colonizing logics of binary thinking about identity difference, and then self and non-self other as apartheid. I'm confused about that. Well, how to read that sentence?
Well, I think difference is underlined because difference appears in another
Entry, yeah.
entry in the text.
Entity
But I think
difference,
self
and
and non-self stroke other, you know, is a binary, you know, the self, non-self or other is seen
oh
as
yeah.
apartheid.
So of binary thinking about identity difference, self and non-self other as apartheid.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, the sentence also diffraction patterns map the effects of differences is often emphasized rather
I ask
than
a
just where
question?
differences appear.
Oh.
Yes, who's that?
Mahtab. It's the last sentence. Diffraction patterns map the effects of difference rather than just where difference appear. I have read that a lot of times, and I'm still not sure I understand what it means. So do you have an example? A concrete example?
Well, what about a concrete example of what's on the whiteboard?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody? So there are differences that appear on the whiteboard. So are there diffraction patterns that map the effects of difference or not? Or is that just a diffraction? Is that just diffraction what's going on? Okay, thanks, Charlotte.
I think just an example, I don't know, I can't get into the whiteboard thing, but just often if you're using diffraction when you're analyzing activity, like children's activity, it's different, I think, than regular qualitative, the differences from perhaps qualitative research is that we're thinking about, if we're talking about a child, for example, moving through the space in a room and thinking about how maybe there's music or it's the space or the pattern of the way the chairs are laid out, we're thinking about the effects of that action or that interactivity between the child and the space, rather than maybe, and I could be wrong with this sentence, but I think rather than just saying, this child walks very quickly through this space, this child dances through the space, but we're mapping what's actually going on. What are those interactions between the space and the child and all the different elements? And so we're thinking about the effects of those things emerging as an assemblage, as a thing that we can look at. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Also, I was just thinking of the example in Meeting the Universe Halfway of the jute factory, and how, you know, depending on the relationships, on how the social arrangements and the physical arrangements of the materiality of the situation and how that would affect difference. But I also think that, you know, often what comes up with this effects of difference is it's about what matters and mattering. It's not just about differences. So yeah, as you've tried to explain, Angela, I think it's much more than just noting where differences are, but what effect do these differences have?
Yeah, and if we think of effect as a noun, maybe that makes it easier. The effects of difference, of seeing what happens with that difference and what does that look like, right? So
Yeah, what does it produce?
Yeah.
Anna says, I think it's thinking about difference as a productive. And Lisa, perhaps that it's not just that we approach it differently and create a different thing. So that's in the whiteboard, but that putting those differences together somehow affects us. So we aren't speaking just about how the creations are different, but why do these differences matter? Yeah, and it's a sharing of material. What is difference doing? So what are the differences doing, like in the whiteboard? And yeah, well, how does it work and what's it producing? What are its effects? Okay.
Shall we carry on?
Thank you.
So Charlotte had to be away from the screen for a bit, so we need a new reader.
We would like to take over the reading.
I can do it, but I've lost track of where we are.
It is
We
Karin
are
Barad.
Karin Barad.
Okay.
Took diffraction.
The second paragraph.
Thank you. Karin Barad, 2007, took diffraction forward as a physical phenomenon, which is part of wave behavior, what waves can do, whether they are light, water, or sound waves. Diffraction is where waves combine when they overlap, and the apparent bending and spreading out of waves when they encounter an obstruction. Barad, 2007, page 28. In combining, waves can be amplified by being superimposed upon one another, or they can be nullified depending on the relative height and the phases of the overlapping waves, whether they are in phase, crest to crest, or out of phase, crest to trough. When waves overlap or encounter obstructions, they form patterns of difference. Barad uses this physical process of diffraction as a methodology that engages affirmatively with difference. It is a rich concept to think with and is central to their agental realist framework.
Okay. Beth has a question, saying a question I have in this is about the specificity of diffraction as a metaphor. At one point, Barad cautions us not to be too literal. I think this is about troughs and peaks and how different resonances meet. Beth, do you want to elaborate where this is said? Because I think, you know, in the second chapter of Meeting the Universe, there's the sort of building on the only a metaphor, but sort of using the actual physics of diffraction. And I think it's also mentioned in the book that Malu wrote on agential realism, where she and others interviewed Barad and other people about how they're using agential realism. I mean, how they use diffraction. So Barad said that they were interested in how Haraway had used it, and they were thinking about it through a quantum physics lens more. But would you like to elaborate on that bit?
It's I don't know where, I just know that I remember it's in Meeting the Universe Halfway. And it's a genuine question I've carried with me ever since I first read it. So, and I think it's easy to picture diffraction in terms of ripples we would see if you drop it, or when it's raining, like when it's raining on water, you get these overlapping concentricities. And I don't, she's talking about the diffraction of light, yeah? And the fuzziness that creates around images. And if you really focus in on that, it's not fuzzy, it is literally shadows and light, successive, I think, resonances. And I may be wrong here. It's a genuine question, and I'm very prepared to be wrong or to have misunderstood, but I thought there was one place to ask.
Yeah, I thought, I think you're talking about the razor blade image where there's dark and light and dark, but they also very much talk about water and waves, and also sound waves, I think, because there's, talking into something and then the waves spread out. But I think what I can remember is that they distinguish between physics and quantum physics in terms of diffraction, how quantum physics takes it further, and the notion of entanglement, becomes a very central one. Yeah,
and I think that entanglement may give us a different set of images to work with than diffraction. And I think maybe where I'm cautious myself, I'll say this and I'll be quiet, about being too literal about diffraction is that thing about if a trough and a peak meet, they cancel each other out. I don't think that would be what Barad would be encouraging us to. That's where I'm kind of like, oh, I don't know that when differences meet, they cancel each other out, that we should stick to the metaphor when it suggests that, but I genuinely don't know. But that's the rub, the nub of it for me.
I mean, the way,
carry on, Karen.
I mean, the way, I mean, in several of their writings is that what distinguishes Barad's way of looking at diffraction is that it's not a metaphor, so that it is material discursive. And so one would tend to think that metaphors are discursive, and there's the kind of it's about the world. Interestingly, Donna Haraway actually has a very interesting chapter in How Like a Leaf, in her book, How Like a Leaf, which is a fabulous interview, where there's a whole chapter on metaphors, and that is actually more complex maybe than we think, the way Donna Haraway uses metaphor. But just to stick here to Barad, is that it is material discursive, so that it's not that it is a metaphorical way of thinking about differences and that they might cancel each other out, but that they're in the world, things are diffracting through one another all the time, and including humans now and again. And then something is produced or something is cancelled out. So it's not like, go on.
I do think that notion of resonance and being cancelled out is used in a diffractive reading. I remember that, that it's not just in terms of, it's also referred to as part of a diffractive methodology. And I mean, maybe when you get into small groups, I can search it out, but it's an interesting thing.
Just to say, and thank you, George, for just pointing out, it's in the chat, that we did have a panel discussion on diffraction with Malou, Jules Kjaer, and Astrid Schrader, and that it is on as part of our resources. So if you want to take this further, and they will sort of experts, and this is book that Viv referred to is called Dialogues on Agential Realism. an amazing resource. But yeah, definitely worth checking out and looking at that YouTube clip. So thanks, George.
Yeah. Shall
I
we
don't have
read
the
the,
book. Oh, go ahead.
Which book?
yeah, you don't know the book.
I don't have Brad's book in front of me, but it's the chapter that says words come to matter more than matter itself. I don't have, it's at the office, but I think that's where Brad talks about metaphor and to be careful not to make words matter. It's not about not using metaphor. It's not just to be careful when words matter more than matter itself.
I
But
do think it's the
but
chapter
it's the
on
first,
diffraction.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
I think so, yeah.
That's chapter 2.
yeah. Shall we, George, will you put the reading back up? I'm just, I don't want to hurry us, but I'm just thinking about us getting into small groups so we can have, you know,
Thank
more
you.
inclusive discussions. So shall we
And
carry on
also,
in a diffractive methodology?
yeah, we can also, and that's also an interesting, I can't remember where I read that, but so the difference sort of being a diffractive discussion or feedback is, or thinking is, what's the new that's produced rather than thinking about when you feedback is kind of summary of the key points, you know, which would be in a reflective way, which I always thought would be is such an important difference. But yeah, also don't you know it is possible to just introduce yourselves to each other in the small group.
Yeah. So let's go on to inner diffractive methodology. Who was reading for us? Was it you, Elizabeth?
Oh gosh, we haven't finished yet. Oh
Yeah, no, we haven't finished, you see.
oh wow.
And it
Sorry.
deals with that. Yeah.
Did you want me to read? Or is
Yeah,
there
if
someone
you
else?
don't mind reading in a diffractive methodology.
My French accent usually kind of mumbles some of the words, but
That's
in a
fine.
diffractive methodology, the details of one theory or philosophical position are read attentively and with care through rather than against one another to come to more creative insights. Brad proposed a diffractive methodology because it is affirmative engagement rather than critique, which they regard as potentially epistemologically damaging process of distancing, othering, and putting another theoretical or philosophical position down. A diffractive methodology is thus not setting up one approach theory of against another, but rather a detailed, attentive, and careful reading of the ideas of one through another, doing justice to the ideas expressed in the text. A diffractive methodology produces inventive and generative provocations and the possibility of transdisciplinary approaches to issues under consideration. Diffraction as a process also focuses on difference that matter in questions of ethics and politics. By making new patterns of meaning that matter, a diffractive methodology is both constructive and deconstructive rather than destructive. Destructive.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So maybe rather than discussing anything more in the plenary, let's give people the opportunity of going into small groups and having some time to discuss. Do you think 10 minutes, 15 minutes is going to be enough or?
Yeah, 10 minutes should be good.
Okay.
And we can
So-
always just see when you come back and you say, no, we want more. You can always go back.
Okay, George, would you mind putting people into groups?
And are we going to go back before you do that? Are you going to go back now in thinking about diffraction, you know, applying this to the example of the whiteboard, the work on the whiteboard, or not this?
Well, if it comes up, yes. But I mean, I think we've got to, you know, it could easily be applied to, especially the last paragraph here.
Okay.
But let's see what comes out of the discussion of the text. Everyone back? So I jumped into a couple of groups, and I think so did Karin. There was some very interesting discussions happening, I must say. And it's really nice for people to have more space to talk about these things. So I'm glad that we have the small groups. We were going to be going on to something else now, but maybe, you know, if there's anything people would like to just talk about from their groups, share, we could spend a little bit of time on that.
I think in all the rooms I went to, and I think, you know, it was a very long 10 minutes, which was fantastic, actually, the way I experienced it. And I don't know others too, but I think it was very generative. And there were some answers to the task we set about the how to read the whiteboard image, right? The map, but etc. Whether that's diffractive or, and there were quite a lot of answers, which just sort of, and I wonder whether the people in those rooms would mind sharing that, you know, their take on it, because it was just so useful. And I'm thinking, well, I was in 4 groups, and each of them just really gave some fantastic responses to that. And then I think we should just leave that, Viv, and pick that up. You know, to what extent diffraction is a form of critique, but affirmative critique, and we can pick that up next time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're thinking that we don't do the next exercise?
I
Yeah.
don't think
Yeah.
so. Let's just have a look.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's have a look
Yeah,
what people...
what I was also in a number of groups, and people were relating it to their own PhD work and their own writings, which was very helpful, I think, in the small groups for people to think further about that, and, you know, whether one can mix and match qualitative and post-qualitative research. Can you do diffraction and then ordinary qualitative research, or is it, you know, possible to do this? How philosophies like already exist within each other, you know, so yeah, there were very also generative discussions about those issues. So anyone?
A parent meeting. Bye, Cherie. Me too. People have to leave.
Yeah.
I saw something else. It was sloppy of me to use, but maybe it was an earlier one. Maybe let's start with the board, the whiteboard, and then we can move on to the PhD diffractions and how you can diffract through the qualitative and the post-qualitative. If you prefer not to speak up, maybe you can put it in the chat, but Teresa, in your group, maybe you wouldn't mind starting? A
Okay,
diffractive
I was
response?
in a group with David and Marcel, and what came up about the whiteboard was maybe that it kind of connected with temporal diffraction in a way. This kind of returning to it, and it being different for the people that made it, for the people who saw it, for the thing itself becoming a, you know, becoming a new thing now, made into this digital screen. yeah, I don't know if Marcel or David want to add something.
Absolutely, just to second that, and the whiteboard very much was kind of at the center of our discussions, talking about the temporality there, but also because all of us started by talking about art, and we all realized that art is something very interesting for us. And then moving to Barad, we thought Barad doesn't actually write directly about art, but their theory is so applicable to it, as Teresa's just demonstrated with the diffractions of the whiteboard. And that got us on to thinking about diffractive methodologies and the challenge of a methodology always having to be different, and it can't be formulaic, right? So Brad is saying you can't just make a formula for diffractive analysis and just apply that the same way every time, which sounds incredibly difficult. But actually, if you think about making art, you know, any kind of art class, everybody makes something different, a bit like we did with the whiteboard. We all make, that's what art is, right? It's different every time. And so maybe there's some connection between diffractive and artistic or creative methods. That's kind of where another of the many places that we got to in our discussion.
Yeah, agreed. 100%.
Maybe Sylvia could come in, because I think there was also a lot of discussion about art in that group.
Yes, well, I was using an example. Adrian, I work with Adrian, is here. I was using an example. Am I able to quickly screen share or not? Because then I could
Yay.
actually show the image I was talking about. Okay, perfect.
You are now enabled.
Okay, so this is part of a wall that I was mentioning in terms, and I guess to me, in my realization this morning was maybe I'm working really quite diffractively and hadn't realized it. But it was images from a large drawing event with students. I asked everyone just to take photos of gestures of drawing. And it was this way of thinking about how and then putting them up on the wall. This is only part of the wall, is to see how the images speak and what do they do to each other. It isn't just what does each instance mean, and which was part of the lure of initially is trying to, we put sticky notes over top to try to explain what, bring words to each moment. But then collectively, what do they do? How does it deconstruct an idea that drawing is about, making a mark on a page, and actually reconstruct and create? This is, to me, the affirmative creation. It actually says drawing is about the hospitalities, the generosities, the pauses, the temporalities, the movements, the exchanges. It's not about just one thing. And it's I like the phrase in the text of a diffractive methodology produces inventive and generative provocations. So it actually produces something, which to me is always the challenge of what is being produced through this, not just what is being undone.
Yes, and going far beyond the individual.
Yeah.
As you were talking about, yeah.
And respectful. There was something also Teresa, sorry, I'm asking you again. What was that again? Respect, in the etymology of respect?
It was about looking again.
Looking again.
But the etymology of the word respect.
Yeah, Haraway has that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Or maybe an example
Priya,
of the.
I mean, maybe Priya has some,
of
she
the
was talking about
PhD
Indian
work?
philosophy.
Did you just say Priya?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Yeah. So in our group, George, I and Verlene and Viv were there, and later Masha also came. So we spoke about two things. One was around PhD and about qualitative and post-qualitative, and that is something I think Karin has sparked for a bit later, that how, diffractively qualitative and post-qualitative methodology can speak to each other. But there was something that I spoke about. So I'm teaching Indian philosophy to students these days, and that is new for me as well. I have not been taught it by anyone. So I'm teaching and then teaching. I'm learning and then teaching. Uh, and I got to kind of, come to this. I don't know if you have heard anything about Indian philosophy, but they go back many, many thousand years. And there are Vedas and Upanishads, which are these very old texts. They were oral traditions, but then put into text. And I came across a part of that in Indian philosophy, which is Advait Vedant, which is very much around non-duality and entanglement. And it kind of reminded me of Bharat. So that is what I was sharing. And I'll read more on this, and I hopefully will check if someone has written anything or not. And otherwise, I'll write something. And yeah, we'll have more of it to share with you all. But it is very fascinating to find something around it in texts which are really old, like they're very, very old texts. So yeah, so I was very fascinated to know how people were talking about, self and the ultimate, like self and the reality, the other reality outside self, not as distinct, but as emerging together and entangled. So entanglement was one word that I could find, that I could, translate that into, was entanglement. And there were these episodes from really, so these like especially Upanishad, that part of Vedas is more like stories. So there are stories set into different, say, courts of kings and different philosophers of that time. So one of that stories was in a philosophical conference, where they were trying to understand, how did we come about to be, how did this word come about to be, and the entanglement of self and everyone else was something which was very, very prominent there, and which reminded me of Bharat's concept. So I just shared that a bit. And then Verlene spoke about, and George spoke about their respective work and PhD and masters, and how methodologically we can think about qualitative and post-qualitative research. So yeah, we were trying to understand that. And I think Verlene and George can speak more on that from our group.
Mm. Yeah, go on.
Has Verlene
I don't know.
left? I don't know. She was also in a
No, she's
very
here.
Verlene's
She's
here.
she's in a
but she
public
was in a
place, so it's
library.
hard for her to
Yeah,
speak.
she was in
Yeah.
a library. She was somewhere in public place that she cannot speak much. So maybe, George can fill in, or she can write.
When Priya was telling us about her experience of engaging with very old texts, and then also Bharat's work, I was thinking about how that's kind of seems like the perfect opportunity to do a diffractive reading. And I'm so keen to read that. Please write it, Priya. I guess I don't know if Verlene, if you want to speak, or if you feel capable of speaking in your quiet library space, please feel free.
You're
Oh,
muted.
you're muted.
Vivian. That's why.
Yeah.
We can
there we go.
whisper, we can really listen carefully.
There's no one around, so I'll quickly say something. And I feel like I'm hiding in a closet. And I think thank you, Priya. You gave a wonderful summary, and yes, the question that kind of came, we're talking about diffraction and looking at. I'm looking at the concept of interaction and how interaction impacts the way that we look at relationality. But my background is in psychology. Psychology focuses quite a lot on, individualism and the individual. And is that even something that you can apply? So that's kind of like a question, and then that was asked. But then can you ask the question, how has the concept of interaction changed the way you look at the world, the way you look at relationships, the way you interact with your loved ones or your children or whatnot? And can you ask that question and look at it from as a qualitative research, and then there was kind of bit of a discussion that came around it. I see Karin thinking. It feels like it's mixing oil and water, perhaps, but yeah. So that was the thought that came up, and various ideas kind of came up. But yeah, if anybody has any thoughts, I will be happy to hear.
It's just so fascinating how certain concepts have made certain disciplines possible, right? So I've just read an article, and I'm happy to share that on the post-qual group, on the soul as a S-O-U-L, as a concept, and how that has made like psychology possible, right? So, and I'm just thinking, when you diffract through, you know, as you're saying, you know, the individualism, and if you diffract through transdisciplinary approaches to the human subject and trouble inside, outside, and include, diffract through the materiality of the subject, what else is possible, right? What then, you know, what are the effects of that diffraction, of these yeah, of these diffraction patterns? That will be very interesting. Yeah, does that make sense? You look not sure. Was that clear? What I just got so excited as you were talking.
I think so. Yeah.
I'll send the article, and then you see what, you know, when a lot of these disciplines are really very recent disciplines in the last, you know, beginning of the last century. And they have come out of, a lot of them, out of philosophy, and how, yeah, and how have they emerged, and what are what are the apparatuses, the conceptual apparatuses that have made this possible? And what is it we're disrupting through post-humanism, you know? But there are a lot of post-humanists who, of course, you know, they diffract through. They've had money, and I'm one of the examples, money for a qualitative project, and then you just, you know, you do the post-qualitative work with it. But my word, I just can't believe the time is just, where is it? Where has it gone? Anyone, any sort of burning points, burning moments? Okay, Priya, you are, in case anyone is interested, I'm teaching from a book based on this podcast, India section. It covers philosophies across the world, might have many other things of interests. So by all means, just click on the link before it disappears. But I think the chat is also saved, isn't it?
I was going to say that the chats from these workshops have been particularly generative. So I will download them and share them, but also when we post these sessions as workshops on our website, I think I might just add all the links to the resources that people have shared.
Would be good.
So that
Really
we, but also all of we in the future, all of us in the future, who are part of this process, can access those resources.
And in the past.
Indeed.
And in the present.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to give you some homework for next time, if you still like to come, we really hope you will. Next week, same time, same place, we are going to think together about diffractive reviewing. So we would like you to bring in an example from your own experience where you either reviewed or was reviewed, but it could be that you haven't written a paper yet, or it doesn't have to be like that, but it could also be that your, I don't know, your master's
Feedback
was
to
reviewed,
students.
or your students, or an essay, but anything that is like reviewing kind of work. So bring in a short example for next time. So thank you very much for being here and joining us. And thank you, Viv. Thank you, George. And thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. It was lovely.
Thanks, Karin and Viv and everyone.
Yeah, see you next week.
See
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
I love that, George.
Thank you. See you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
See you.
Bye-bye.